Welcome to the debate. Usually when we think about the human body, we assume its boundary just, ends at the skin.
Right, like a biological absolute where my skin ends, the world begins.
Exactly. It feels completely non-negotiable. But then you encounter the reality of the caste system in rural India, and suddenly that boundary is entirely rewritten. Imagine a brutally hot day in the fields. A Dalit laborer is parched, just desperate for water. An upper caste woman brings water, but she doesn't, hand over a cup.
Which is what we would normally expect.
Right. Instead, the laborer must cup their own hands. The upper caste woman holds her vessel exactly 4 feet above those cupped hands and pours.
Wow. 4 feet.
4 feet. She has to make absolutely sure that not even a single droplet splashes backward. It's this massive physical gap between what her society deems pure and what it deems polluted. So in this world, the skin isn't the boundary anymore.
It's an invisible 4-foot radius of ritualized disgust.
Precisely.
It is a staggering, visceral image. And it really forces you to feel the reality of what we are dissecting today. That visual comes directly from Bama's groundbreaking 1992 autobiography, Karukku.
A truly tectonic shift in literature. The first major autobiography by a Dalit woman in Tamil.
Yeah, it forces whoever is reading it to confront exactly how systemic oppression is mapped directly onto the physical breathing body. And we are going to deeply analyze Karukku through the theoretical concepts outlined in Anupama Rao's edited volume, Gender and Caste.
Right, and our central debate today is about how best to apply Rao's framework to Bama's lived experiences.
Exactly.
Because I argue that the core of Karukku is best understood through Rao's concepts of embodiment and institutional dispossession. What we see in this text is how major overarching external institutions, specifically the Catholic Church and the agrarian economy, adopt the logic of the caste system.
You're focusing heavily on the structural side then.
I am. They weaponize it to reduce Dalit women to a state of ritual impurity and constant physical hazard. The oppression Bama faces is at its root structurally and institutionally engineered.
Well, I come at it from a completely different direction. The institutional analysis matters, sure, but if you stop there, you miss the actual revolution of the text.
How so?
The true power of Karukku, as illuminated by Rao's anthology, lies in the politics of difference and what we call triple subjugation. This text isn't just a complaint against a church or a landlord.
Right.
It is a radical, devastating critique of mainstream sisterhood. It exposes how Dalit women are uniquely sexualized and marginalized by both upper caste actors, including upper caste women, and by Dalit male patriarchy. It basically shatters the very assumptions of mainstream feminism.
Okay, let's lay the groundwork for my position first. When Rao discusses caste as a form of embodiment, where the body itself becomes a culturally legible surface of stigma, she is giving us the master key to understanding Karukku.
That 4-foot rule we just talked about, it isn't just a local village quirk. It is the operating logic of the Varna system, the traditional Hindu social hierarchy that places Brahmins at the top and relegates Dalits to the very bottom.
Outside the system entirely, labeling them untouchable.
Right. But the crucial revelation in Bama's work is that this Hindu system is actively maintained by the Catholic Church.
But she joined the church voluntarily, right? To escape that exact village dynamic?
Exactly. She enters a religious order hoping to serve the poor. She genuinely thinks she is leaving the caste system behind, but she discovers the convent is simply a luxurious cage serving a wealthy Jesus.
Yeah, that phrasing is so potent.
It is. Inside this supposedly universal loving institution, Dalit nuns are physically segregated. They are assigned the impure tasks of sweeping and cleaning lavatories. The Catholic Church just seamlessly adopts the logic of the Varna system.
So you're saying the church essentially acts as an arm of the caste system?
Yes. For Bama, the institutionalization of caste, the way an international religious body uses theology to enforce dispossession, is the primary mechanism of her oppression.
Look, I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the primary axis is strictly institutional in that top-down bureaucratic sense. If you read Rao's framework closely, she draws heavily on the concept of Dalit women talking differently.
Right.
Bama's primary struggle isn't against a faceless church bureaucracy. It's a struggle against the illusion of a monolithic womanhood. Let's pause and clarify what we mean by Brahmanical patriarchy.
Sure, the system where purity is maintained.
Exactly. Maintained through the strict, violent control of women's sexuality and labor. But Rao highlights that upper caste women are fully complicit in this. In Karukku, the people directly oppressing Bama aren't abstract bishops. They are the upper caste nuns.
But they are enforcing the rules of the institution, though.
They are going far beyond the rules. These are women who view Dalit women as fundamentally subhuman. They explicitly compare helping Dalit women to feeding milk to a cobra.
Yeah, that line is chilling.
It is. You cannot reduce that to mere institutional policy. That is a deeply internalized, caste-based hatred coming from women directed at women. Therefore, the text has to be read first and foremost as a foundational text of Dalit feminism.
Because it breaks the myth of sisterhood.
Exactly. It shatters the uninterrogated assumptions of mainstream Indian feminism, which loves to pretend that shared gender automatically creates solidarity.
I mean, you're completely right about the interpersonal cruelty of those nuns. It is undeniably horrifying. But you're missing the invisible architecture behind it.
The architecture?
Yes, let's stay right here in the battleground of the convent. I want to focus on the mechanisms of the institution, not just the nasty comments of the individuals. The church utilizes the core monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience as literal tools for what Rao terms caste-enforced dispossession.
Wait, I'm struggling with that leap. Poverty, chastity, and obedience are the foundation of Catholic monasticism worldwide.
True.
Monks and nuns take those vows in France, in Brazil, in the U.S. How does that specifically translate to caste-enforced dispossession in Bama's case?
Think of it as a laundering mechanism. Bama's grandmothers were panayals, bonded laborers.
Right.
They toiled in the fields from dawn to dusk for upper caste landlords, entirely trapped by agrarian debt and caste duty. When Bama becomes a nun, the church requires that exact same endless, subservient, menial Dalit labor.
But she's doing it for the church, not a landlord.
Exactly. They launder it through the theological language of obedience.
Ah, I see where you're going.
Right? By demanding obedience to the religious order, the church effectively enforces the exact same bonded labor system her grandmother suffered. Bama is ordered to scrub the lavatories purely because she is Dalit.
Wow.
But she is told she must do it cheerfully and without complaint, because she took a vow of obedience to God. It masks brutal economic and caste exploitation behind a pristine veil of spiritual purity. The institution turns God into the ultimate upper caste landlord.
The laundering mechanism analogy makes sense for how the labor is extracted. I'll give you that. But look at the convent dynamics again. It essentially proves Raw's point that you cannot just look at institutions without looking at intersecting identities.
How so?
The upper caste nuns use caste ideology to completely override any notion of gender solidarity. When they call the Dalit women cobras, they aren't just trying to extract free janitorial labor. They're pathologizing the Dalit female body as inherently poisonous, treacherous, and wild.
This is exactly what Raw means when she insists we examine the overlapping patriarchies of caste communities. The upper caste women are actively acting as agents of Brahmanical patriarchy against the Dalit women. Gender affords Bama zero protection.
But if theology masks the exploitation in the church, what happens when you step outside the convent walls, where the theology isn't an option? If we look at how the secular state enforces this exact same hierarchy, we see the institutional logic driving the violence, not just interpersonal hatred.
You're thinking of the state police.
Let's look at the cemetery conflict in Karukku.
Oh, right. The clash between the Dalit Christians and the upper caste Chaliyar community.
Exactly. It's a dispute over land. When the state's reserve police arrive, they don't act as neutral peacekeepers. They literally feast on sheep provided by the upper caste Chaliyars.
Yeah, the corruption is blatant.
And then they act as a private militia. They mercilessly beat the Dalit men to drive them away from the contested cemetery space.
And when the Dalit men flee into the hills to hide, what happens? The police specifically and deliberately target the Dalit women left behind.
They do.
This is a crucial, undeniable point for my argument. The police don't just beat the women. They use highly specific, obscene language. They tell the women to entertain the police at night, and they wink while aggressively shoving their rifle butts against the women's bodies.
It's horrific.
It perfectly illustrates Rao's observation regarding the specific vulnerability of Dalit women as sexual property.
But is that driven by gender, or is it a tactic of territorial control?
I mean, if you are listening to this right now and thinking, well, the police are just being corrupt and brutal, that has nothing to do with gender, you have to look at the specific nature of the threat. Their violation is used to discipline the entire Dalit community.
Right, a terror tactic.
The state views the Dalit woman's body as public property that can be violated with total impunity to send the message to the men hiding in the hills. Imagine being caught in a vice grip. The upper castes are turning the screw from the outside, utilizing state violence. And Dalit patriarchy turns it from the inside, leaving the women vulnerable when the men flee. This is the triple burden.
Right. Caste, class, and gender.
Exactly. They are oppressed by their caste, their class, meaning their total lack of legal recourse against the police, and their gendered sexual vulnerability. You simply cannot explain this solely through the lens of economic dispossession over a cemetery.
Hold on, calling it a triple burden is accurate, but focusing heavily on the sexualized language obscures the primary driver of the state's actions.
How does it obscure it?
The violence is ultimately about keeping Dalits off contested land. The police are acting as armed enforcers for the Chalier caste's monopoly on spatial geography. This maps perfectly onto Rao's point about the material reality of economic dispossession.
So you're saying the sexual violence is just a byproduct?
I would argue that the sexual threats, while utterly vile and specifically gendered, are being deployed strategically as a tactical tool. The state uses the threat of sexual violence to enforce the architecture of exclusion.
Just a tool?
They want to break the community's morale so completely that they surrender the land. The root engine of the conflict is institutional dispossession of property.
I disagree entirely that the sexual threat is just a secondary tactical tool. I mean, if it's just about land, why is the language so specifically designed to strip them of their dignity as women?
To inflict maximum psychological damage.
But the police aren't just saying, get off this land. They are asserting a dominance that relies on the deep-seated societal belief that Dalit women have no honor to protect in the first place. It is a highly specific gender terror.
That's a fair point.
And frankly, this connects directly to the daily grinding exploitation of labor and the agrarian economy that Bama describes. Rao's anthology insists repeatedly that we have to view the symbolic economies of gender and the material reality of economic dispossession together. They are not separate tracks.
Okay, let's look at the material reality of the fields then. How do you see that playing out?
Look at the brutal gendered wage gap Bama observes as a child. Both men and women go out into the fields. They do identical, back-breaking work under a blistering sun, weeding, harvesting, carrying heavy loads.
Right.
But the men are always paid more in cash. The women are paid in stinking, broken grain gruel. And when those exhausted women return home from the fields, what happens?
They face horrific domestic violence.
Exactly. Bama recounts the story of Uran, a man in her own community, who drags his wife by the hair to the community hall and beats her with the belt like an animal, while the community watches.
It's awful.
The Dalit woman is uniquely squeezed in that vice grip I mentioned, crushed horizontally by upper caste capital in the fields and vertically by dully mill patriarchy in her own home. Mainstream feminism, which ignores class and caste, has absolutely no framework to capture Bama's reality.
I completely agree on the material reality of the fields and the horror of the domestic violence. But I want to zoom in on how that broken grain gruel is physically delivered to the women.
Okay, the delivery?
It brings us right back to the concept of bare life. You just mentioned Agamben's bare life earlier in our notes. And for those who haven't waded through heavy Italian political philosophy, bare life basically means a person who has been systematically stripped of all political and social rights.
They aren't treated as a citizen or even a full human.
Right, they are reduced merely to biological survival, like livestock.
And you see that in the distribution of the gruel?
Intensely. It isn't just that the women are underpaid, it's the ritual of consumption. Leftover, rotting food is tipped from a distance into the Dalit grandmother's vessel, which is placed purposefully by a dirty drain.
The upper caste Niker women refuse to touch the vessel because they fear pollution will travel backward up the stream of food and infect them.
It's not just a transaction of calories for labor.
It's performative.
It is a highly choreographed ritual, weaponized to strip the Dalit woman of her political and social humanity, reducing her strictly to that biological bare life.
It reduces them to biological survival. Yes. But it is also a relentless 24/7 psychological assault on their identity.
Precisely. And this is exactly why Bama realizes that physical resistance isn't enough. The resistance has to be intellectual. Think about the pivotal advice Bama receives from her older brother Annan.
That education is the only way out.
Right. He tells her the brutal truth. Because they are born into the pariah jati, they are stripped of all honor and dignity by default. But he tells her that education is the only mechanism to throw away these indignities.
He says if she studies and makes intellectual progress, people will be forced to come to her of their own accord. Bama responds by studying in an absolute frenzy. She realizes that to combat this systemic economic and ritual starvation, she requires an intellectual resistance that forces the institutions to acknowledge her capacity.
Annan's advice is the turning point of her youth, no question. But I would argue that the ultimate form of Bama's resistance isn't just excelling within the oppressor's educational institutions.
What is it then?
Excelling at their game isn't enough. Her true resistance is what academics call an epistemological rupture.
Let's unpack that term for a second.
To put it simply, an epistemological rupture means you aren't just arguing against a system using the system's own rules and language. You are flipping the table entirely.
Okay.
You are changing what counts as knowledge in the first place. Drawing on Rao's discussion of how Dalit women's autobiographies function, we see that Karukku isn't a Western, individualistic look at me and my personal journey memoir.
It's a collective we.
Yes. Bama is bearing witness for a whole community, forcing her community's knowledge into the public sphere.
I hear that, but I would frame her ultimate table-flipping moment around her reinterpretation of theology. After suffering the profound hypocrisy of the convent, Bama doesn't actually abandon her faith. She completely reshapes it.
She seeks out the poor Jesus.
Exactly. She actively rejects the wealthy Jesus she found in the Catholic hierarchy. The Jesus who associates with the rich, demands unquestioning subservience from the poor, and cares about grand architecture.
Right.
Instead, she embraces the poor Jesus, a revolutionary, localized figure who associates exclusively with the marginalized and is righteously angered by systemic injustice. This is an institutional rebellion. She is reshaping the very boundaries of theology to demand material social justice.
I don't disagree that her theological rebellion is profound. It is. But look at the literal vehicle she uses to deliver that theology and to deliver this entire book. Her language.
You mean the Tamil she uses?
Yes. Bama makes a deliberate, highly dangerous, and highly political choice to write Karukku in Cherry Tamil. This is the spoken, everyday dialect of the Dalit settlement.
Instead of the formal literary Tamil?
Exactly. She chooses this over Sentamil, which is the refined, sanitized literary Tamil, heavily favored by the upper castes and the literary academy.
Why is that choice so dangerous?
Because language shapes reality. If you force a Dalit woman to write her trauma in high-caste, polite Sant Tamil, you are forcing her to sanitize her own abuse to make it palatable for the people who abused her.
Wow. Yeah.
This is exactly what Gopal Guru means by talking differently. By using the coarse, vibrant, visceral language of her people, complete with its highly specific vocabulary for agrarian labor and caste abuse, she flat out refuses to translate her identity into the pure language of the oppressor.
It forces the entire literary establishment to meet her on her own territory without a filter.
Exactly. Even the title of the book, Karukku, is a massive linguistic masterstroke. It refers to the serrated, razor-sharp edges of the Palmyra leaf.
Right.
It represents the events that cut her and made her bleed throughout her life. But in Tamil, it contains a pun on the word karu, which means embryo or seed. So the book is a weapon that cuts, but it is simultaneously the seed of a new, revolutionary Dalit feminist practice.
That's fascinating.
She enacts Rao's call for a new politics by entirely refusing the refined, acceptable upper caste version of womanhood.
As we synthesize these incredibly dense perspectives today, it's clear that reading Karukku alongside Anupama Rao's theoretical framework yields profound insights. From my view, focusing on the mechanics of power, Bama's text perfectly maps onto Rao's theories of how macro-institutions function. The agrarian economy, the state police, the Catholic Church, they don't operate in silos. They collaborate to enforce ritual purity and extract economic wealth through dispossession.
Right.
That 4-foot rule we started with isn't just a physical distance maintained by one woman with a water jug. It's the operational distance maintained by every major institution that extracts Dalit labor while systematically denying Dalit humanity.
And from my perspective, emphasizing intersectionality, Bama's work embodies the necessary politics of difference. It demands a deeply intersectional Dalit feminism that recognizes the unique triple subjugation that Dalit women face.
Yeah.
It proves that you cannot understand the Dalit woman's experience without recognizing how she is trapped in that vice grip, squeezed by upper caste actors, including complicit upper caste women, and by patriarchal forces within her own community. The serrated edge of the Karukku leaf cuts right through the comforting bourgeois myth of a universal sisterhood.
While we obviously emphasize different mechanisms of power, institutional versus interpersonal, spatial geography versus epistemological language, we both agree that applying Rao's rigorous framework reveals Karukku as far more than a personal memoir.
Oh, absolutely.
It is a razor-sharp sociological manifesto for collective liberation. And the complexities of Bama's evolving Dalit theology and her subsequent literary works certainly offer rich, uncharted territory for anyone looking to understand how power operates.
It definitely leaves us to ponder deeply how these multiple axes of identity shape not just the nature of oppression, but the very language and structure of our resistance.
We started today by talking about the boundaries of the physical body and how the caste system violently extends that boundary out to 4 feet of empty space.
Yeah.
Bama's ultimate triumph in Karukku is that through her intellect, her redefined faith, and her unapologetic, serrated voice, she steps across that 4-foot divide. She forces the world to look her squarely in the eye, and she refuses to let them look away.